Why do we live in a world where everyone is inept? What the fuck? So I just saw this video. This dude is explaining why we divide circles into 360 degrees instead of, say, a simpler number, 100. And on the surface, I agree with everything he's saying, right? It's like 360 is nicer. It has more divisors, right? It's powers of 10 are almost prime numbers. 360 is an anti-prime, so it has a lot more divisors, and it's much more useful. But then he goes into shit like, well, if you had 100 degrees and you divide it by 3, now you have 33.3 recurring degrees. And I'm like, that is not actually a built-in problem with base 10 right there. That is a problem with the way that you're representing fractions in base 10 by just continuing to divide by 10 forever instead of doing something reasonable like using continued fractions, which is independent of any base and for any rational value will always terminate. Always. And so say we're using base 10, say we're using 100 degrees for our circle, and we want to divide it by 3, but instead of using a decimal expansion, we use continued fractions. And it's because we're dividing by 3, it's going to terminate, because that's going to be rational, right? So what you're going to get now is 33 and 3. Because what that 3 is going to mean, that's your coefficient, right? The 3 means 1/3. You just take the inverse of it, 1/3. So now, one of the main problems that he's complaining about is solved simply by not being fucking retarded. Right? If we just used continued fractions conventionally to represent values between integers. They can be rational, irrational, whatever. It doesn't matter what your base is. And it's impossible to choose a base that's always going to work anyway, right? So say we do choose something like 360. Well, now when I divide by 7, I still have a problem because 360 is not divisible by 7. So if we use something analogous, the base 360 version of the decimal expansion, right? So the base 360 expansion is still not going to work nicely, right? Even though it is a rational number. So you end up with the same problem anyway. So the thing that he's saying that we're getting rid of, we don't actually get rid of. Right? So there's two problems. One, base 10 is not friendly in general because it's almost a prime number. It's really close to a prime number, but it's not so close as to be like 9, which is the only divisor 9 has that isn't 1 in itself is 3 because it's a perfect square, but there are nice things that come along with it being a perfect square, right? So, but in a sense, 9 is more prime than 10 is, but 10 is as prime as you can be without having the lovely property of also being a square. So, yeah. 10's a bad choice. Because if we use base 9, at least you could have perfect squares built into your number system. 10 is just trash. And the fundamental reason that we use base 10 is because of the rise of the Roman Empire, for the most part, and trade that they had with places like Egypt and Persia, and ultimately out to China and stuff like that. And some of those places were using base 10 in the Bronze Age. This is true, although across Eurasia prior to the Bronze Age collapse, most of the indigenous languages would have used a base 20 numeral system, and this is because not only do you have 10 fingers, you also have 10 toes. And if you have the luxury of being able to do math, you're probably not like a slave and doing work for somebody else, right? And if you are a slave doing work for somebody else, you probably wear shoes, which means your feet aren't available, which means when the Bronze Age collapse occurs and you suddenly become free to form your own state, like the Romans were, well, you're used to wearing shoes. That's built into your culture as former slaves. So all you have is your fingers. But you also were never educated in math. So you use base 10 and you kind of have to invent your own number system, and you come up with crap like the Roman numerals, which, for what they are, considering that they just invented them basically from scratch on their own with no previous real knowledge of mathematics, respect. Right? Respect. But it's a terrible number system. Right? And base 10 is a terrible choice. And if they had actually been familiar with Bronze Age mathematics, they would have made neither of those choices. Right? So the heritage that we have is actually that we're proud of. Like, ooh, metric is base 10, so it's better. Yeah, you are being proud of being ignorant. Literally. Because the heritage that you are proud of is coming from Rome, which, okay, so personally I think that they were probably slaves or something like this, which is why they had skills like building walls, digging ditches, planting crops, like this kind of shit they were good at. Making boats, not so much. Counting, not so much. Right? So, yeah. Reading and writing, not so much. They had to borrow an alphabet from somebody else. And when they did it wrong, right? Like they took somebody else's writing system and they didn't understand how it worked. So they actually sort of changed how writing worked because they didn't understand what was happening quite. And some of those changes actually turned out to be kind of nice. Like, you know, this isn't to rag on them for that. It's just to kind of put in perspective what happened there. These were not educated people, right, that founded all of these things. These are not traditions that are well thought out. These are things that simply happened out of convenience given the circumstances that they were in. And they're perfectly useful, that's true. But upholding them as like the best possible way now, when it's obvious, you can look at it and be like, no, it's not the best possible way. That's just stupid. Frankly. At this point, anyone who's like, yeah, metric is good because it's base 10. Let's divide the circle into 100 parts because it's base 10. You're an idiot. At this point in time, the only way you can make an argument like that is if you're an idiot.